you think deeply, and I feel like we don't ask the right questions because journalism is dead. So we don't have people asking the questions.
Yeah.
Everything's performative and about the click. So folk come on, they pitch their books, they got the 2-minute segments, and folk don't even know how to have this conversation because they don't have the background, the intelligence. And I'm not saying I'm super intelligent, but I've been doing this for 30 years, so I know how to
Yeah.
ask questions. And it's just frustrating when I watch, like, we can't get to the bottom of it because we don't even have a conversation. To your point, 3/4 of white, so-called white people, self-segregate. So when you talk about if people would just come together, they run to be away. They don't have
Yeah.
relationships with anyone Black. This is an NBC poll that started me on this
Yeah.
journey of even like, why do you segregate? I had this conversation about with Reed Galen in Utah, and he was
Yeah.
talking about coming together. I said, "You live in Utah, sir. You live in Utah. How many
Yeah.
Black people in Utah? Like, your kids don't have any relationship, but you want to talk about coming together. You self-segregated. You wanted to do something. At least you went to the South Side of Chicago." So I'm just like, it's frustrating when if I feel like we're being gaslit and no one's really, I don't want to be, hyperbolic, but like, maybe it's time for this thing to fall. It was rooted in something really not true, that all men are created equal, endowed by these inalienable rights, because the framers of the Constitution never imagined me or my mother or my
Yeah.
grandmother or my
Yeah.
grandfather outside of chattel. So
Well, let me ask you two questions. When you say it's time for this thing to fall, what do you mean by this thing? And when you say it's time for this thing to fall, what do you envision happening after that? Like, what do you build in its stead?
okay, this fake democracy and all of the myths around it. George Washington couldn't tell a lie, cut down a cherry tree, Ed wouldn't. All of the things that make this country great built on a lie. So let's tell the truth. So when I say let's dismantle the education system,
Okay, yeah.
books, all of that. Stop all of this CRT business. That's a law school practice. Not even,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
y'all are lying. Okay, let's dismantle that. And in its place, and I don't want to sound like a socialist, but there shouldn't be a space in this country. We have enough land for everybody to have a house. Let's have real leaders that care enough about people so that we can build. Oh, there's Montana, North and South Dakota. Y'all get 2 senators. So there's 6 senators in a space that barely has 1 million people, and DC's
Yeah.
not a state. Let's
Yeah.
make this balance. Let's remove the electoral
Yeah.
college, get rid of that, rooted in the 3/5 compromise. And let's really have one voice, because we have 100 million people that don't feel part of this system, that sat out the
Yeah.
last election. And I
Yeah.
don't blame them. I don't blame
Yeah.
them, because everyone should participate in this thing if we really are a democracy, which we're not.
Yes.
So
Yes. So
let's stop
you
lying.
believe in democracy. What I worry about is when you hear people saying, clear the swamp or burn this down. They want to get rid of democracy, and they
They
want to
want to
get
get rid
rid
of
of,
Black and brown people.
well,
Let's
and
tell the
I'll tell
truth.
you,
They
yeah,
don't.
because,
They don't. They don't. They don't care about democracy.
no, and they want to get rid of democracy
So
because
that they get rid
then
of Black and
they
brown
can,
people.
yeah, well, then they can create, an authoritarian a government, and ensure that white Christians continue to rule in the United States despite the wide demographic change that's happening. They want
That
to
part.
cement
Yes.
in white rule.
Yes. And you got to put air quotes around Christian, because the Jesus that I know would not do any of the things that these folk are doing, including have all white church. 866-801-8255. That's some BS. Let me ask you, as a daughter of parents that were from Germany and Switzerland,
Yeah.
which was technically neutral,
Neutral.
not really, not really. The hills are alive with
Yes.
the sound of. So let me ask you, the stories told in your household about that, because if your dad was in Germany when it fell,
Yeah.
how did he avoid being a Nazi? Or did he?
So my dad was born in 1932 in Bavaria, which was a hotbed of Nazism, very, very conservative. Um, and his father, my grandfather, had fought in World War I and had lost his feet. He was 18 in World War I, and his feet froze when he was fighting in the trenches somewhere trying to probably take over France. And he got gangrene. He lost his feet. That was probably horrible for an 18-year-old boy, but it saved him from serving in World War II because he was physically not capable of doing that. he became a school teacher, a history professor, and he lost his job quite early on because he was outspoken about the Nazis. So he was a history professor. My dad tells a story about when well that when Hitler was coming up and Germany was ostensibly a democracy and Hitler was popularly elected by the Germans. He was quite popular. My grandfather was quite worried, and he's just like, this is not a good man. This is not good. And then when the war started and Hitler said that he had very limited aims, he just wanted to bring other Germans back into Germany and change the borders a little bit. And then of course when he invaded Russia, my grandfather said, we're done. We are done. The world allowed us to survive aggression in the First World War. They are not going to allow us to do it again. So he was kind of an astute. He didn't get it all right, but he was quite astute. My grandmother, they came from a wealthy family, and they were quite well educated, and she basically paid off the local SS leader to leave the family alone. They were very, very religious, and they just kind of got through the war by hunkering down. But my dad, the stories he told afterwards were more interesting. That he was a lifelong Republican. Both my parents were lifelong Republicans, Northeast Republicans, fiscally conservative, socially liberal. And starting in January of 2016, when I go home to visit, my dad was just incredibly agitated. He wasn't a guy who got scared very easily, and all he wanted to do was talk about Donald Trump. And he said, oh my God, it's happening here. It's all happening here again. He said, I thought this could never happen in America, but it's happening here. And he was beside himself. He was so scared. And I said, Dad, it's not going to happen here. America is different from Germany. Our institutions are older. Our democracy is older. Our democracy is stronger. And he said, no, no, no. No.
I have to pause you. We have 10 seconds. It's going to go straight to break. Can you stick around?
Okay. Yeah.
Stick around. Barbara F. Walter is here, winner of a lot of great accolades, and her TED Talk, TED 2023, on this subject is a must listen to. We were having an off mic conversation and a conversation before we went to break about your grandparents and the Nazis and your father in 2016 being agitated about this man, Trump, who I thought was going to win. And everyone was screaming at me for saying, well, I would start my show saying President Donald Trump, just to get people understanding that this could happen. And no one believed it could happen. And then it happened. So what happened in your household?
Yeah. So I think my dad was the only, old white man, Republican white man, who thought Trump was going to win too. And he didn't want him to. So he said, this is exactly what happened in Germany. He's using the same racial tropes that Hitler used. He's scapegoating people. He's scapegoating immigrants, and people are responding to it. So when I said, no, Dad, it's not going to happen here. America's democracy is so much stronger, and Americans are not going to turn on each other. He didn't laugh because nothing was funny about this. He said, no, just watch. They're going to walk in lockstep behind him. And that's exactly what not only the Republican Party did, but what the Republican leadership did very, very quickly. And they've remained consistently behind Trump and Trump's agenda ever since. So my dad, he saw the same patterns, the same strategies that the Nazi Party used in the 1930s to grab power and to create this very authoritarian state. He saw those similar strategies with Trump when he first emerged. And of course, now we've seen how that's evolved. But there's one last thing that I do want to tell your listeners that's really, really important. I've been studying civil wars for over 30 years, and there's been about 250 of them. And one of the things we now know is who tends to start civil wars. And it's not the people that most people assume. Most people think, oh, it's going to be the poorest groups in a country, or the groups that are most heavily discriminated, or it's going to be the immigrants. And they think that because those groups have legitimate grievances, right? They have reasons to want to change the status quo, but they don't start civil wars. And they don't start civil wars for the most part because they don't have the capacity to do so. They're often very heavily repressed. If they ever get out of line, the government and law enforcement cracks down on them. You see that here as well. The groups that tend to start civil wars are the groups that had once been politically dominant and are in decline, period. Those are the ones. It's the dominant groups that are losing their power. And basically, they don't go down. Don't go down without a fight. And what's happening here in the United States? Well, we're going through a massive demographic transformation from a country that, has, since the beginning of our country has been majority white and majority Christian, to a country that's going to be minority white, and that's going to happen between now and about 2045. And there's a big subset of the white population who feels that this transition should not happen. And if democracy is going to allow this to happen, then they'll get rid of democracy. They truly believe that America is a country of whites, and many of them also think of Christians, and that it is their right. It is their right to maintain power at whatever cost and using whatever means possible. And that's what we're seeing happening here.
I agree with you. And it's not just within these borders. It's a global movement. It's not just here. It's a global movement. And I think it's more powerful than the Nazi movement because it is ubiquitous and we don't even know. I mean, I was talking about the skin bleaching in Africa, the billboards for that, because it's in the people's minds, which is why I'm always going to challenge people who identify themselves as white with the question, what makes you white? Why are you white? What does that mean? Because until we deal with that, this is not political. This is identity at its core, and you're not going to get people to give up their identity so easily until you challenge it. And I'm challenging it because it literally means until people like you who look like you decide that whiteness is a made up construct, which it is, and stop investing in it, people like me are always going to be in jeopardy. And so I am going by me. I'm people with melanin who are visibly black or brown or whatever we call it, even the terms, because we're not going to be able to win this unless we get folk, because it's not political, it's identity. And until we get people to really digest this white thing is a made up construct. Why am I invested in oppression? I don't want to be.
It's more than a made up construct. It's actually a tool of oppression, right? We have this term in political science called ethnic entrepreneurs. They're people who use identity. They use ethnicity and race to try to control people and to manipulate them so that they gain their support for their own political purposes. Tucker Carlson, he's an ethnic entrepreneur. Donald Trump's an ethnic entrepreneur. Anybody who uses race, religion, and or ethnicity for their own self-interested their own purposes, they're using it as a tool.
And it can show up in people who are black.
Yes.
They're ethnic entrepreneurs who are black. And this is why when we move away from black and white and get into this, this part of it, I think that's where, because I don't think there's anybody in America that sees themselves as a bad person. They don't, if you ask, they think that they're doing what's right for the country, or what's right for their family, or what's right for their progeny. Right. And they've never been challenged on this. Right. So what's the end goal? What is the end goal? Is it to erase all of the people? Because we know DNA wise, you're gonna have some. South Africa tried it. There's always gonna be somebody. It's in your DNA. We are cousins. It's in your DNA. You can't. Yeah. We're the same people. We can procreate. We're not like the animal kingdom where a donkey and a horse get together and that progeny is sterile because it's not supposed to happen. They're different species. We're the same species.
Yes.
So why are we having this fight? We got to do this. And I'm going to invite you, when you go on your talks to ask this question. I'm curious as a researcher. I want to know how many white folk have ever been asked what it means to be white and if they have a good answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people. I'm a teacher. I am a speaker, and nobody's ever asked me that question.
All right. Well, let's be on a mission together, and I'll invite you back. Reach out to my team if you have enough for us to have a decent conversation, because I feel like even how we segregate in this country, New York, I used to cover education. New York school system, one of the most segregated. You have schools in New York that are 98% white and Asian, and you have schools that are 99% Black and Hispanic in a city that is one of the most diverse cities in the world. How? Resources, it's on purpose, right? So we have to start to challenge this. It's baked in, and we accept it. And then we got the media, which is one of the quickest ways to dismantle society, right? Oh, is it owned by people? Is it corporately run? Does Jeff Bezos own a whole Washington Post? Yes. How is that? Rupert Murdoch, does he own newspapers? And then the local news? Yes. So even how we get our information, to your point, Google search. Google's not a search engine. It's AI grabbing from whatever is already out there. So you're going to get bad information. Where do we go to get truth? So we're gonna lean in. Urban View, you can come here, but we need this to be magnified. To your father's point, he watched it happen.
Yeah.
Twice.
Yep.
It's still happening.
Yep.
So we're gonna have to fight. I'm in it with you. So sleeves are rolled
I'm
up.
glad. I'm a fighter. You sound like a fighter. Yep. That's what we need.
Well, I thank you. We're going to have you back, Ms. Walter, Dr. Walter. And thank you for the work that you're doing. I appreciate you. Thanks for coming through.
Thank you, Karen, for the work you're doing. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
I run my fingers through her hair as she smiles and says that she loves me. Isn't it lovely when the one you love's thing